Oh, hey, Sarah, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I know you just wrote a new book. I can't wait to hear about that process and how it's going. We were just starting to talk about it, but I know you're a coach, keynote speaker, author now. Where did this all start from you or for you? Sorry.
That's a good question. I think it's so funny. There's so many different ways to tell that story. In many ways, I think the first half of my career was quite traditional, if there is such a thing. I came
Sure.
out of university. I studied at Cambridge here in the UK. I'd been very academic throughout my schooling. That was my focus, was get the grades, do the classic high performer kind of. That was always the focus. Went into management consulting, spent quite a number of years there. I did an MBA, went into finance. It was all the sort of, yeah, normal career, if there is such a thing, at least for my peer group. And then sometime, probably it was about a decade into my career. I'd been in banking for a few years, had regretted, I think, that choice to make the move, realized it really wasn't for me, but had struggled a lot to move out of it. I think looking back, I lacked a lot of confidence. I was going into interviews probably a bit desperate for a job and also just doubting what I was capable of bringing. And it was around that time I started working with a coach, I didn't really know anything about coaching.
Mhm.
I met up with a friend. We were at a mutual friend's wedding, sort of poured my heart out to her over a long walk by the beach, along the beach, and about how unhappy I was and how frustrated I was, and just felt very stuck in my career. And she said to me, "Have you ever thought of working with a coach?" And the simple answer was no, but right now I'm open to
Ready.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And through that was introduced to my first fantastic coach. He was US based actually, and really discovered what coaching could do, what the doors it could open for me, the shift in my own self-awareness. And through that, got a new job. She supported me through that process. Actually went back into consulting for a few years, but fast forward a few years after that, still didn't feel it was quite right. I knew it was where I didn't want to spend my career doing that. And my coach had said to me that she thought I would make a good coach. So I kind of went back to her and said, "Well, did you mean it?"
Yeah.
First of all.
Do you say
And
that to all of your
yeah,
clients? Yeah.
exactly. But second of all, can you really make a career of this? What does it look like? How do you turn this into something that you do? Turn the people side, which I'd always loved, into my full time. And we had a discussion and I took the plunge, and that was back in 2016. I retrained and I've been doing this for nearly a decade now and still love it. It's the longest I've
Nice.
ever done anything, but yeah, still wake up
As
happy to be doing this.
as the receiver of coaching, when you first got into that, what were some of the key distinctions? Do you remember, because it sounds like you had some pretty seismic kind of shifts that happened for you. What were those?
Couple of things. One big one, which I still think about now, was how I framed. I was thinking it was the bigger point was about how you frame situations, that the expectations or the perception that you go in with tends to be then how that situation goes. So I was going into interviews at the time with a perception that it was about proving my competence, that
Mm-hmm.
it was about somehow making people like me,
Mm-hmm.
and that it was the key to doing well in an interview was getting the answer to every question right, that I had to show that I knew everything. I sort of say it out loud now and I think, how naive. Like it's a really odd framing. But at the time that my own sort of insecurities led me to that, I was like, well, that's that's how I've got success in life so far is getting stuff
Sure.
right. So that extends now. So the shift to say, well, actually, it's about building rapport. It's about helping somebody see, can they imagine working with you? Would they
Mm-hmm.
like to work with you? And that took so much pressure off because I realized I can build relationships with people. That side I'm good at. I just get caught up on myself when I'm trying to figure out the right answer. And so I think it completely shifted how I turned up in those experiences. And I remember one of my friends saying to me a few months in after I'd been coaching, he just said I seemed more comfortable in my own skin.
Mm.
I think that was one of the biggest shifts was knowing myself better, realizing the value I brought just by who I am and how I show up and work with people, that my value wasn't in my knowledge and my correct answers to questions. It went so much deeper than that. And that was something I could have much more confidence in when I was meeting new people.
Well, because it seems like, again, just 8 minutes into the conversation or whatever, but when you said how you grew up and, I was academic, I was always trying to get like the good grade. I was always trying to, so it was all about sort of living up to other people's expectations to a point, and then perceiving that expectation in a job in that, well, if I know all the answers, then I'll be a fit, right? And then I'll mean something, right? But it always kind of comes up short, right? So when you got into coaching yourself, what did you do first? Like did you say, okay, I'm going to be a leadership and business coach. I'm going to be, and I actually, before we go there, let me preempt my question with a question.
Yeah.
Because I get asked this sometimes, and I'm curious what your answer to this would be. What's the difference between, because you could say that some of the work that you needed to do had to do with your past and the wiring of it, right? The way you were wired for success, what your definition of that was, and what
Yeah.
actions needed to be created. What's the real difference in your mind between like seeing a therapist for past issues or seeing a coach? Like when does that divide happen in your mind?
It's a really interesting question. I think for a lot of people, either or both modalities can be helpful.
Sure.
Some prefer a more coaching style, perhaps a more forward focused style, a more perhaps action orientated style, learn through practice. Some perhaps prefer a more reflective, looking back, unpacking, going really deep. It's not that you don't go deep in coaching, but it's in a slightly different way. In therapy, I've done both.
Right.
Um, for me, one of the places I look is if people are getting really stuck on something in coaching, if there's an area people consistently run up against a block, that can be an opportunity to try a different modality. So try therapy as an approach to unpacking that, because
Right.
it may simply be that the coaching approach isn't right for that. But for
Right.
other people, for that same issue, it could be. So, I mean, I draw the distinction as more of, as you did, kind of more of a forward looking versus more of a past looking. But in that in itself is a generalization which
It
isn't
is.
always helpful. So I actually think the two complement each other hugely, and quite a chunk can be down to personal preference and what people want to try. And if one works for one area or one works for something else, great. I'm not attached to exactly
Yeah.
where people go to get their support. I'm more interested that they get that support and that they build that awareness and that they understand themselves, and through that create whatever it is they're going after for themselves.
No, I agree. And I've always felt like if there's a lot to unpack from the past, that trauma, that kind of thing, right? That it, maybe therapy is going to be the best thing there. Not to say that a coach, if you're connected with them, can't help with some of that, or if it's, but right, if it's a little more intertwined, and there's people that are trained for that, right? And so I always look at coaching. You mentioned it, and I'm going to paraphrase, but I sort of look at therapy or coaching as forward focused, and not that we can't dive back, right? But that if we've got to stay too far back, it might not be the best modality, right? But I also agree with you that it's a little dangerous to kind of lump it all together and say, that's the way it works for everybody. But yeah,
And I think it's worth, I was just on that, it's worth saying that I think that's not, there are a subset of areas which for me are very clearly therapeutic.
yeah,
Whether it's areas of, as you say, trauma. For me, I'm not trauma trained and I would not wish to go there. I would not wish to risk causing harm. Issues of addiction
yeah,
often are very, so there are certain areas where I do draw a clearer line and I would signpost people in a particular direction and say, I'm not qualified to take that. But I also think there's that big gray area in the middle where either or both can be supportive.
yeah. No, very cool. So as you got into this, did you, I mean, when you decided to make the pivot, because here you are your whole life and, several years into your career now, and kind of doing things a little bit by the book, right? Like, probably looks good on paper, got the plaque and the, valedictorian or whatever, all that stuff, but it's not feeling good. So you make this decision that had to have been pretty scary, I got to think, at the time, because it was a complete departure from where you had been. And now you're going to, all the revenues based on you, whatever you earn is up to you. What was that decision like? And then how did you approach it? Did you decide to go with a particular niche in coaching, or where did you go?
You're right. It was definitely a scary decision. I think, interestingly, I think the work I'd done through coaching had given me some of the confidence and the awareness that it was worth a try,
Mm-hmm.
that more of the status quo definitely wasn't going to work for me. And so the opportunity to try something that, I did my research that I thought had really had the potential to be good was worth it. Um, Interestingly, I think I found it easier to make the decision for myself and harder to share that decision with some others because I
Sure.
still had that external fear of what would people think? Am I throwing my career away? And you're quite right. So much of my early career had been as much about, am I presenting this view to the outside that I'm successful?
Mm-hmm.
And this was a kind of big left turn from that, especially because, a decade ago in the UK, yeah, coaching was known to a certain extent, but it's very different. Certainly then was very different understanding of it to perhaps in North America at the same time, where it was a much more normal, much better understood thing to get a way of getting support. So it sort of, I was definitely my biggest fear at the time was more about the reaction of others. I actually inside was pretty confident that there was a good chance this would work out for me. Um, and then in terms of, the process itself, I'm naturally a bit risk averse, let's say. So I started my coach training while I was still in a full-time role. Got back from that first module of training. I trained actually in the US and just knew it was right and handed in my notice pretty much on the spot and
Oh,
said,
wow.
no, I'm going to do this. And that was also through knowing myself that I knew if I sat with one foot in both camps, I wouldn't go all in on the coaching. And I kind of knew I needed to go all in on the coaching to actually make that into a successful business for me. So I was lucky to be in a financial position. I was able to do that and said, right, I'm going to take the bet on myself. I'm going to leave the full-time role and I'm going to go all in to try and make the coaching work. Equally, I knew I had the backup plan. I remember the conversation, I think it was with my dad at the time, where again, my coaching was even less familiar and had even less understanding probably of what it is. But my dad's question to me was, well, do you have a plan B if this doesn't work out? And what I realized was that the coaching skills I would build would be valuable way beyond just individual coaching and actually would open up lots of other avenues if having my own business didn't turn out to be right. So I felt that gave me also confidence in that decision to go after it. Um, you also asked about the niche. I think not particularly. One of the things I realized through my training was early on, it was just about coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Get the practice, learn the craft, build the skill, and actually through that, understand who I enjoy working with. Because I probably had a bit of a sense of that, but part of it was learning by doing and realizing that the more I coached, the more I did sort of head towards a particular type of person because that was who I really enjoyed working with and I really got the engagement from and really felt I could make a big difference with. So I sort of discovered that over the course of several years, I'd say it was probably 3 or 4 years into coaching before I was really starting to hone in on perhaps what my ideal kind of client would be.
Which is what?
Which is
Or
so
who,
it's
I should say.
who, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my ideal client is someone probably just one layer below the top of an organization. So that might be a CEO in a group organization or someone who's sort of C-suite, but not CEO level or that very high level. Because I enjoy working with people who are at the intersection of the sort of leadership and management, who have a responsibility to lead a relatively large team of people to get stuff done, to deliver operationally, but who are also often managing up and involved in the leadership and the strategic element and that thinking forward and the much bigger picture side. And it's an area where I find you make a huge amount of difference because it's people who are still hands-on leading and managing. They're not at that level where they've sort of got above that. And
Right.
so all the work I love to do on how people relate to each other and communicate with each other and so on has a huge ripple effect through the organization because that individual has a big responsibility. But it's also helping them with that navigation of the twin track of the operational, they just have to do stuff. Also, it's all about people and relationships and that bigger leadership piece. And I find that a very juicy and interesting
It's
area
funny.
to
I
work
was
with
just thinking
people.
of the word juicy, like right when you said it. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of juicy. Like there's a
It
lot of
is.
arms and legs to it. There's a lot of impact, right? There's a lot of impact.
Yeah.
Um, what do you see since you're dealing a lot of times with people again, that similar sort of avatar? Do you see common threads that they're coming to you with in terms of, is it overwhelm? Is it, what is it, I guess?
Yeah. Overwhelm is certainly one of them. Often they're navigating that tipping point where a lot of their career up to that point, promotion and success has been based on what they're able to do. Can I deliver this? Do I have this expertise in this area? Do I make stuff happen? And they've usually passed that tipping point where actually it becomes more about relationships. It becomes more about influencing and the people side of it. And that actually often they do a lot less, or at least they should be doing a lot less. But many of them are still trying to hang on to the doing
Mm-hmm.
while adopting this whole big new area. And so that leads to overwhelm. It can also lead to sometimes it's just around confidence and the confidence to let go of some of that stuff, being able to trust, being able to really delegate effectively, to allow others to take on that responsibility and lead them without over managing them. Um, and that then leads into lots of stuff around how they communicate, how they build those relationships in a way that empowers the individual and allows them to get out there and do their thing rather than feeling like they're standing over them and still seeking to control.
Yeah.
Like that again, that shift, the letting go of stuff a little bit, building the relationships is a really key common theme, I would say, amongst the leaders I work with.
And we didn't talk about it in your description of the client, but I'm guessing another attribute would be because certainly these are high level folks, but it sounds like they're high level and ramping up, not high level and have plateaued. And the reason I'm making that assumption is they're seeking coaching. You know what I mean? And like if you're like, I got 3 years to ride this thing out, you're probably not really seeking business coaching, right? Um, and I'm guessing in that coaching that also, if they don't figure this out, if they don't figure out how to use the organization and how to stop being the rainmaker or the driver, that they're done and they maybe don't want to be done, right? They've got years left in the tank that they still want to move up into that bigger position.
Yeah, I think that's true. Not necessarily for all. Sometimes where I work with people is particularly through the transition.
Okay.
So, it can be when they're relatively new into that more senior role and
Mm-hmm.
are, sometimes it's the organization will offer the coaching as support for that transition. The more forward thinking organizations, I think, recognize how tough that particular transition can be and that adding another layer of support can be hugely beneficial. But you're right. I would say on average, one of the things they say, I'm sure you know about coaching, is that you tend to coach people who are a bit like you. And,
Right.
I've always been someone who's been naturally looking for what next and learning and curious and ambitious and thinking about how to grow and do something more or more interesting. And I would say, yes, I naturally attract those kind of people who are not just, let's just do this job well and, be in it for life. But it's, I
Right.
want to learn to do this job well, but I'm also, as you say, have the eye on what's next? What's
Yeah.
my next opportunity?
When you're building the business and you're starting to figure out, I'm just thinking of the early days, like 2016, and maybe, it's just this variety, right, of ages and occupations and everything, but you're starting to realize, as time goes on, that you really enjoy this. You don't strike me, and take this the right way, I'm just saying, based on your background and even our few minutes together, I don't see you being I'm going to market myself all over social media and sell this thing. So I'm guessing that, I guess what I'm wondering, where the question is in all of this, is it takes a lot, I think, for someone to build a independent coaching business, let alone grow it to the point where you're a published author and all of that, let alone to where you're then getting invited to come in and assess operational effectiveness of other companies and being hired by the company itself to hire, to train their C-suite leaders and stuff like that. So how did that happen? Was it, hey, I got a couple of these people and we did great work together and they started referring me to other companies? Or what did the, I don't want to say revenue because it sounds kind of gross with coaching, but you know what I mean? What did the ramp
I mean,
of
it
the
is that.
business look like? Yeah.
It's a business, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be cash flow. There's got to be revenue.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, throughout it, I have built it almost, I would say, 80 to 90% plus on referrals.
Sure.
So it's been about through, I guess, the very early days. One of the biggest pieces or best pieces of advice we got through our coach training was just to tell everyone that you're a coach. It's astonishing how it's so simple, but that willingness to actually say to people, I coach, that's what I do, opened a lot of doors early on because, my first client came to me essentially because he'd heard that. He was an acquaintance of mine who's like, oh, I hear you're coaching now, right? I'd like to work. And it was the simplicity of giving that message out. So I think sometimes it doesn't have to be the fancy social media marketing, but actually, do people know what you do? Is the sort of 101 basic level.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, it's in a way, it's the same way that I work with the people I coach. It's about building relationships over time. And if I build those successful relationships with the people I coach, they introduce me to more people. They just,
Sure.
that happens these days pretty consistently. So I have to do less of the sort of outbound. That's not to say I don't do it. I do it these days probably in a more targeted way. Because I have that focus of the kind of work I'd like to do. And I've also done some of it through partnerships, through working with either groups of coaches or as a couple of organizations I work with in a coaching capacity who do wider leadership work. And I enjoy that both because it gives a bit of variety. It's the sort of team element of coaching that you don't always get, but it also, again, it opens doors. It's the network. My MBA network is still, I mean, I did that, God, how many years ago? 17 years ago. And that's still a fantastic network for me
But it was
make
really
introductions. But
just
all of that comes together.
owning it, putting a name on it. And because I feel like I was smiling as you were giving that description because I know what you mean, because I think it sounds in our heads like it's not enough or something, right? Like I'm a coach, like what? So we make it complicated to make ourselves, I think, feel better about what we're doing, right? So it's like, well, I work with high net worth individuals that are scaling their companies and trying to, and then someone goes, oh, in their mind, they're like, I was just looking for a coach, I don't think I'm all of that, right? And it's like we way overcomplicate it. So I'm curious, when did you decide to write a book? How long did that take? By the way, Sarah's got a new book out called Do Sweat the Small Stuff. And yeah, so tell us about the inspiration for that. When did you decide to do it? What was that journey like?
Yeah. So I'd wanted to write a book for quite a long time. I mean, right from almost when I started coaching, and possibly even before, I'd sort of had an itch of thinking, I wonder if I could. And part of me was a curiosity about the process, what it would take. Did I have it in me? That definitely wasn't a certain yes when I embarked on it. But it was equally clear. I wanted to wait until I had something meaningful to write about. I didn't want to write a book for the sake of it. I will say there are some, you may have found this when I became a coach, there's 1,500 different people descend on you to tell you how to run and grow your business. And a number of people say, you just need to write a book. I'll help you knock one out in a couple of months and we'll get it out there. And you've got, I don't want that. I want a book. If I'm going to write one, I want it to be one I'm proud of and that means something to me and that has a message that I actually want to go and take out there rather than just ticking a box. And I think the idea for it came together. It was really when I was starting to sit back and reflect on the consistent themes that kept on and on coming up through the coaching. And this was coaching with almost anyone I worked with. We're not even just talking about my particular niche. It was such a common theme across people. And what the book I felt offered was that chance to get that message a bit more widely. By nature, coaching is expensive. You're working with a very limited number of people. And so to be able to make a wider impact, a book gave me the opportunity to do exactly that. So I worked with my publisher, Practical Inspiration. Alison Jones, who runs that, does a huge amount in supporting authors in developing their ideas and honing them and connecting them in with the business. So it's not just I'm writing an interesting book, it's how do I connect it with what I do and what matters to me. And yeah, and then the idea for the book through that was born, that this consistent piece, that the tiny interactions we have every day, the tiny moments, the saying hello, the how we phrase things, the how we listen to people, the nuances of those conversations, to me makes a big difference. And I'd seen it on the other side, sort of being on the receiving end of poor practice, if you like. And this was the opportunity to sort of turn that around and say, well, actually, let's look at some good practice. Let's look at what it looks like to do this right, and perhaps help a group of people realize the impact they're having, which maybe they don't currently realize and don't want to have.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that coalesced into the sort of the core ideas of the book. The process I sometimes describe as a wrestling match. It was about a year of writing, definitely bumpy at times, definitely times when I loved it, plenty of times when I hated it and wished I'd never embarked on it. But I'd created a lot of external accountability by telling a lot of people I was writing a book, just as I did when I said I was a coach. It was like the same process of tell everyone I'm writing one, and then I'm actually going to have to write this thing. And it worked. So
I
yeah.
do that. I do that a lot. And sometimes, sometimes I get mad at myself for doing it, but I make public proclamations a lot of times, where they don't even have to care, like I'm not saying
No,
it to brag. I'm just saying it so it's out there. And now I said it and I have to do it. And yeah, I mean, that's why people sign up for marathons 9 months in advance. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm committed at this point. So
exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
I,
it's exactly that. And as you say, it's not even if they care, and half of them might not even know, but it's the fact that I've said it, the fact that it's out there, it's that sort of declaration, and then it starts to become reality.
well, and I mean, I love the title, and I love what you're saying about it, because I think I remember working with a CEO that I already thought was really, really great. So we were in the same company together. I wasn't coaching him, but we were in the same company together. And I remember doing visits with him, like location visits. And I thought I was good with people. And in fairness, I mean, I was. I mean, I think if you're grading on a scale, I was good with people,
Yeah.
would engage people. I think made people feel appreciated and loved. But he was like next level on this small stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, to me, it's like if I said hi and hello and had a nice conversation with the receptionist in the morning, I don't need to do it every time I pass her desk, right? I'm in a hurry. I got stuff to do, but he always, whether it was just a wave or a nod and people appreciate it so much. And the amount of, I don't even say camaraderie, the amount of appreciation I think that people felt for being seen and being heard
Yeah.
were just top notch. I've never seen anybody better at it. And what it said to me too is that without him saying it, what spoke to me was I get caught up in what I'm doing and what I'm thinking about a lot, right?
Hmm.
To the point where I certainly don't mean to offend anybody. I'm just on task, right? And
Yeah. We get really focused on exactly. Yeah.
totally. And he can get to this level where it's like, well, there's no bigger task than this person in front of me right now, which allows him to be totally present. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it was like a whole different level and something to kind of aspire to.
That's a great way of putting it, that there's no bigger task than the person in front of me right now.
Right.
And that person might be in front of me for a handful of seconds or for 10 minutes or for an hour. But either way, it's how do I make them feel seen and heard and understood
Right.
pretty consistently over time. And it's not about being perfect. I'm really clear about this. This is not about being paranoid about every little moment, but we need the net to be heading in the right direction and to be positive. Otherwise, the relationships just don't work, and you
Yeah.
don't have the trust, you don't have the respect. And then at the moment when you need influence, or you need to ask somebody to go a bit above and beyond for a particular reason, then why would they? Like,
Right. Like you don't
there's
care about me, right?
exactly,
Except
you
when
don't
you
care
need
about
to.
me, so why would I do this extra thing for you? So
Right. Right. So when people are working with you outside of your book, which you can find on Amazon and your website and I'm sure lots of other places, but
all good bookshops. Yeah.
yeah. So how do people work with you? Are you still doing one-on-one or are you doing group or like what are you doing now?
Yeah, I still do one-to-one coaching. So I maintain a set of clients that I just work with myself and independently alongside the other wider leadership work that I do. So yeah, if you know, it's people can come find me. LinkedIn is the main place, probably where I hang out and share stuff. I also write quite a lot on Substack, put sort of a deeper some deeper stuff on there, which people would be great to come and join the conversation over there. But it's yeah, I'm always open to conversations with interesting people on the coaching side, and actually beyond that, as you mentioned right up front on the speaking side, because I really enjoy that opportunity to work with groups in that context, and bring that sort of interactive experience to challenge people in a different way and hopefully inspire some different thinking.
Yeah, well, good for you. I mean, in the last, what, 9 years or so, you've completely pivoted to something that was calling you, which is amazing, and you've turned it into an amazing business and something
Yeah.
that's helping other people. So very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I still love it. And hopefully in a decade's time, I'll still be doing this or a variant of it. Who knows?
I'm sure you will. I mean, I think sometimes when you're doing something like this, where it's a passion, you're able to check a lot of boxes personally, but you're also contributing, and putting something out there that it probably, I would guess, still feels very new, right? And who knows where it'll go over the next decade.
It's the joy that every time you work with a new client, you get that freshness, you get that new, as you say, the newness, the different insight, the learning about somebody, learning about their hopes, their aspirations, where they get stuck, where they get challenged, and really seeing them deeply. Like often in coaching, that really being seen in quite a different way and being able to have a much more provocative, often quite fun, provocative, but still provocative conversation to provoke that new thinking you're right. That keeps it very fresh. I'm sure you find it the same with coaching, but also, as you say, there's just that continuous opportunity to pivot. So when new opportunities come up in spaces that I'm interested in, then they're there to be taken. It's the good side of being an entrepreneur and having your own business.
Totally.
Don't get me
Were,
wrong, I miss the salary sometimes, but yes, the
were you
predictability at least.
you took your training through IFC, correct?
Yeah, at ICF training. Yeah,
ICF, sorry.
it was with accomplishment coaching in the US.
I have a friend going through that. I don't know if it's from the same exact program, but I think it's ICF. And yeah, were you obviously you were a fan? It worked well. I think he'll be listening to this episode for sure because he's a guy that's going to want to pivot out of corporate, I think, in the next few years. But yeah, what were your thoughts on that training?
I really enjoyed the training.
Yep.
It was at the time, again, I think it's changed a little since. For me, a lot of the training in the UK was slightly more academic orientated, which in some ways would have suited me very well, but I was aware enough at the time, I think, to recognize that wasn't quite what I needed. And the part of the transition that I needed to coaching was not just the nuts and bolts of how do I coach and what's the process and what's the skill, but it was also the self knowledge and the awareness of my blind spots and the willingness to sit in uncomfortable conversations at times, to not just retreat back to sort of safety and something comfortable. I needed to be able to hold my clients sometimes in that space, which both for me naturally, and I think there is a slight British tendency of that, we're just
And we
not
think you
quite so
guys are.
connected with our emotions and all quite polite and
We
all the
just think,
rest of it.
yeah, you're all. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
Right? Like that kind of thing. So, did you find? So, you found the U.S. training what it sounds like to be a little more direct and a little more hands-on versus academic.
It's very much a hands-on training. It was sort of immersive, experiential. Did a series of modules covering a series of sort of different themes and areas around that may come up in coaching. But yeah, it was pretty full on at times. You're sitting in a room for a full day in that group. It wasn't chalk and talk. It's not someone sitting at the front with a PowerPoint running through how to coach. It was all talking and coaching based. And right from day one, it was challenging us to coach each other live in the room and reflect on it and learn on it and so on. So it was I think for me exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
It's not to say there weren't times during it where I hated it and wished I'd never put myself in that
Yeah.
situation in some particularly uncomfortable moments. But one of the skills they used to talk about was this idea of sort of being ungettable, that there weren't, and I mean that in the sense of there's nowhere that I'm not willing to go in coaching. There's no conversation that I'm sort of not willing to have. It doesn't mean I'll be comfortable in all of them, but it means I've got an ability to sit in them and be in them and sort of not shy away from that space. And that was something I definitely took from that it was a year long program over a series of modules and really pushed my boundaries on what I could be with,
Yeah.
which I think set me up very well for being able to do the same for my clients and hold them in spaces that perhaps they were a little uncomfortable being, but also still feel safe. You're not taking it to that point of discomfort, but you want to stretch people. It's what we do and challenge people in a different way.
Well, it kind of seems like your own journey, at least the last whatever ballparking, maybe 15 years,
Mhm.
going back to when you were still doing like independent consulting and stuff like that, is you started training yourself to do things that weren't necessarily comfortable, because the things that were comfortable, which was following the status quo, getting the good grades, getting the good job, weren't fulfilling you. So you're like, so the first, it sounds like, career pivot where you started doing that was breaking away from corporate and going into more of an independent role, and from that to coaching. And then after a while it was like, well, sometimes when it doesn't feel good, necessarily doesn't mean it isn't good, right? And now it's like, I mean, writing a book is a massive challenge, right? I mean, and probably not something, even though it was in the back of your mind, are you mentally, I'm guessing you just didn't have the, you weren't there yet, you know what I mean, like a decade ago, right?
I think, yeah. And I think I sometimes say, I think you only find out if you can write a book by writing a book. Like you
Mm-hmm.
never really know in advance. That was certainly the case for me. The, there's an irony in all of this because it's interesting hearing you frame it that way about that, the willingness to sit in the discomfort and know when something's not right or be willing to take a leap and sort of take a risk. There's an irony. I think I learnt that actually a long time before. I did a lot of sport. I was quite a high level rower, so I did crew. I learned at university. I raced in the boat race here in the UK, Cambridge against Oxford. Rode very seriously for a number of years afterwards, and actually got very used to discomfort. Now it's more of a physical discomfort, but I could absolutely push myself into moments where it was really uncomfortable with a goal of creating something beyond that, to sit in that discomfort quite literally in those moments. I think it then took me another decade to realize I could translate that same ability and understanding into the other parts of my life. I was like, well, I can do it physically, I can do it in sport, I can push myself incredibly hard in that arena. But I hadn't realized that actually, in some ways, the mental approach is quite similar in the other parts of life, but
Right.
it took me a long time to realize that transferability, if you like, and realize that I could do it with my job or do it in other things and I'd be okay. You come out the other side, you recover, we're so much more resilient than we realize
Right.
and and that it's worth it. That the rewards you get from pushing yourself like that and from being willing to be uncomfortable, yeah, they're so worth the discomfort in the end.
Yeah, you ever read David Goggins?
Yes, I've read.
Yeah,
Yes,
he's the ultimate of pushing into the discomfort.
yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
love that. Well, congrats on everything. Congrats on the book. It, again, all of it's kind of come full circle, and it seems like, again, I mean, even though you're so accomplished already, it's still. I'm just looking forward to seeing where it goes from here. The
Me
book's
too.
only been out for a few months, so it'll be interesting to see how that does over the years. I feel like sometimes with leadership books, we were talking about this, like you don't really know what the momentum of a book is sometimes for quite some time, but it's very good. I think it's going to do well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So good to meet you. Thanks for your time today.
Pleasure to meet you too. Thank you.
All right, take care.